Welcome to Hayden Behind the Canvas, the podcast where we take you behind and beyond the brushstrokes and into the stories behind the art and the artists themselves. I'm Simon Burgess and I'm joined as usual by the incredibly talented Tracey Hayden, owner and curator of the Hayden Gallery. Tracey, nice to see you again. This week we've got David Browne.
We certainly have, and I think we're in for a treat on this podcast. He's very engaging, and his work is very, very special. So, looking forward to putting him out there and finding out more about his practice.
So, David, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Lovely to be here. Lovely to be invited.
I understand that you studied fine art back in the 80s.
I did.
You then took a bit of a career shift or didn't really pursue art maybe in the way that you might have hoped to back then. So you didn't really return to rediscovering your art, I suppose, until your mid-50s. Just tell us what happened in that gap.
I mean, I had a wonderful time at Newcastle University. It was, at that time, there was very few universities that actually you could do a degree in fine art. You usually went to the local art school, but I kind of avoided doing the art foundation. I could go straight in. And I think the thing about Newcastle was it had this sort of reputation of Victor Passmore and Richard Hamilton. And in a way, it was resting a little bit on its laurels. But we had fantastic studio space. There were some very good tutors, particularly in the sculpture school, which is kind of how I got drawn into making sculpture at that time. Very, very different to what I do now. But there's some very engaging, interesting people. And then you get to the end of it, and there'd been absolutely no kind of preparation for what next. And I would have to be honest, I was a bit lost. And so I'd moved down to London. I'd met my now wife. She was doing architecture in Newcastle. She was in London, lots of work. And I sort of drifted through doing model making for advertising companies and then went into publishing for about 18 months, 2 years, and kind of thought, well, actually, I'm not really using my art skills. So I signed up for a PGCE at Brighton Polytechnic and became a secondary school teacher for a few years in a very tough school in New Haven on the cliffs overlooking the sea. And it was fun, some really interesting staff. We had some great times. And then I had the opportunity, I got a job working at Kingston College of Further Education as a lecturer, which is very grand. It was amazing. We had a wonderful period. And I think it was around that time that New Labour had gone into power and it was all about education. So suddenly there was this kind of resource came in. And this kind of encouragement of giving people a second chance, which was I quite liked about FE. You had lots of kids who'd failed at school or they'd gone off and done other things, but I really had this desire to either do art, design, media, performance. And so we just developed loads of BTEC programs. Now, I hadn't come from that background. I'd done the kind of classic A-levels, going to university. But it was like a really fantastic opportunity for these youngsters to open doors for them. And then we started developing foundation degrees. We worked with University of West London, Kingston University, and then we had degrees, and we just grew and grew and grew. And it was very exciting. And I have to say, there was an amazing team of people in fashion, music, film, radio. And that was great. And I did that for about 10 years. And then austerity measures started to kick in and it got much more difficult. It became about kind of less resource, less opportunity to increase teaching loads, less teaching time for the students. And then it became about making people redundant. And it got to the point when actually I then became an expensive line on a spreadsheet. And I took the chance for voluntary redundancy. And I suppose it was a bit younger than I was expecting to leave, but my wife had recently set up her own architectural practice. Our kids were at an age when actually we could make things work. Alongside that, and this is the really interesting bit, is her father passed away and she inherited this olive grove in Italy. And not that we knew much about olive groves or olive trees or olive farming. But I had the time and the space to think I could spend time in Italy. So that was an interesting moment for me.
So was it at that point that you thought, I've now got the opportunity to rekindle some of that passion, but what was the change in mindset to think, actually, I can get back to what I love doing?
Well, I think a couple of things happened. We're based in Ditchling, and Ditchling's got a great tradition of the arts and crafts going back to people like Edward Johnston, who designed the typography for the London Underground, Eric Gill, the arts and crafts movement. And we bought these old buildings adjacent to our property, and we converted them into studios. We get the Brighton Festival in May, and we have artists' open houses. So I started to invite friends and people in the village who were photographers, furniture makers, and I curated exhibitions, but also gave me that impetus to start making my own work again. So it was a kind of incremental over a 2 or 3 years. And then once I'd taken full voluntary redundancy, it was like, well, I've always made things. Now I can do it every day. And that was exciting. Also very scary, because it's you lack confidence in what you do. And what are you going to make? Because no one's telling you what to make. That was frightening, but also very exciting. So what I used to do was, when I went to Italy, and I was there quite a lot on my own, I just used to draw the olive trees. I got back into drawing. And something is always been in me is drawing. It's always like the starting point. So it was the drawing of the trees, at the same time pruning the trees and learning about the olive grove. So sort of building this relationship with this landscape was where I was at that time, at that moment.
Tracey, how did you first discover David?
So like I say, I'm always researching where to find artists, and I'm always looking for things that appeal to me. And I happened to be at a gallery down in Sussex and came across David's work, and it just did it for me. I knew that I had to get in touch with this guy and see if we could match up and get him on board, which thankfully we've done, which is going really well.
The pieces that Tracey saw were some that kind of like made from olive leaves, and they're being cast onto sheet metal. And I can see why Tracey, in terms of having looked at her work, I think it resonates in terms of, I think we've got similar interests. And
it certainly was a technique that I'd never come across before. So it was, it certainly triggered an interest in me. So it was like, yeah, I've got to have a chat with this guy.
So David, for those who are unfamiliar with your work, can you just describe your artistic practice just that little bit more, how it's evolved, particularly since taking on that olive grove? How has that new environment influenced your creative process and some of the materials that you're using?
I'd got signed up for some printmaking courses at Brighton Independent Printmakers in Camtown. So I was learning a bit about printmaking and different kinds of paper. And you have a lot of waste paper when you do printmaking, because you get a lot of rejections. So I thought, well, actually I could start making paper myself, making paper pulp. So you watch a few YouTube videos, you read a few books, and the climate in Italy is perfect for making paper and casting it. They got these amazing surfaces, the walls of the house, slabs of travertine, marble, and lots of bits of rusted old sheets of metal. And so I was doing all these test pieces and trying things out and exploring. In fact, I'm very obsessed by geometry and pattern making. Of course, you have a lot of that is rooted in the Cosmati mosaics and things that you get in the churches. My daughter visited, who was studying at Glasgow School of Art at the time, and she said, "Have you thought about using the olive leaves, Dad? Because that would make a really interesting paper." Well, no one had made, I don't think, olive leaf paper before. People made nettle paper and use other materials for making. So we have a lot of olive leaves. And to pick, 2 kilos of olive leaves does take quite a long time. Very therapeutic, you're just sitting there on the terrace, maybe a glass of wine, and you keep going. And then once you've got a couple of kilos, I put them in a big cauldron, fill it full of water, and then we put them outside on a grill and we just cook it for 2 or 3 hours. and I add some soda ash to it to help neutralize the liquid, and some mordant to help keep the colour. And then after a couple of hours, it then gets washed really thoroughly. But then, of course, the leaves have really got soft, and you then put them through a blender, chop them all up. And what I then do is add just a little bit of cotton rag, just to give the pulp a little bit more strength to it. So once that's done, you've got this sort of big tray full of the pulp. And alongside that, what I've done is I've taken metal sheets, and the pieces that Tracey saw in the gallery were A3 in size. And what I've done is I've sort of painted designs onto the sheets, which echo my interests in some of the archaeological sites that I've been to, almost Ostia Antica or Villa Adriana. And then I spray its hydrogen peroxide with wine vinegar. And where the paint isn't, you've got the metal, and that just starts to fizz and with rust. And then you get the decal, go into the tray with your paper pulp, and you place it onto the metal, and then you get rid of all the water, take off the decal, and then you just let it dry. And it takes maybe a couple of days for it to completely thoroughly dry out. Then you very carefully peel the piece of paper off, but you're not ever sure what you're going to get. You've got the geometry of the design, but then you've got the paper, the rust, which is running through, and inevitably some of the paper gets stuck, so you get like little tears. But in a way, that's kind of interesting, because that's kind of like the work's partly about fragility and erosion and surface. And of course, as a sculptor, it's the materiality of the pieces. So that was the work that I did, which Tracey initially saw. And then when she got in contact with me, she said, "Oh, come to the gallery." So that was lovely. Went to Marlow, visited the Hayden Gallery, but she was at home. So I went over to her house.
Why was I at home at that point?
I think you had a grandson.
I did.
A very, very
tiny little baby.
And I think his mum had abandoned him for the weekend, I think.
I think she had. She trusted me at that point.
So we had Granny Tracey sitting in the garden. It was one of those lovely August mornings, and this very well behaved baby. He was very quiet, very calm. And we just had a lovely chat about the work.
Yeah, we did.
Your work, my work. You talked a bit about the gallery and how it evolved. And
it was a really nice moment, wasn't it? It was
very nice. Then, and the takeaway. So can you do these big?
You know me, there's a theme that runs through me. I like things big.
Notice this is a recurring theme in these podcasts.
Definitely.
So just how big can you make them, Dave?
We upscale them.
And I thought, well, there are people with big houses, big walls. I was thinking, yeah, absolutely, this is great. But I was also thinking, I'm making these in Italy, and then got to get them back to England. So I was then very careful.
And they're fragile.
So I worked out that I could make them 1 metre by 1 metre approximately. So I bought some big metre sheets of mild steel, took them down to Italy, and then I have to say a lot of credit to my wife, who was very good at helping me roll out the pieces. But you can't use 1 metre by metre decal. The decals are only A3 size. So I was experimenting, layering the pulp, and then seeing how it dried and if it held together. So initially I did some just cotton rag ones, and then that was okay, that worked. So then it was, at the time, this is late September, we just finishing making a very modest amount of wine with these few Sangiovese grapes that we had. And I knew the colours of the Sangiovese reacted brilliantly with the rust. So I thought this would be interesting to do for the Hayden Gallery, is to have the lovely Sangiovese mauve, purpley colours. And so that's kind of what we did, but we had a limited amount of pulp. So I'd be really careful.
Did that mean you have to drink more wine to get more?
It's chaotic. I mean, my father-in-law planted these vines 40 years ago, and I don't think we're going to win any awards for our winemaking or our ability to maintain a vineyard. I think the wild boar get to eat more of the grapes than we get to use them. So, but it was interesting working on that larger scale. It did have a wow factor. When I walked into the gallery for this current exhibition, Tracey had arranged for them to be framed, and they looked fantastic. My wife and I we were just really chuffed. They looked stunning, but it looks like they're steel. They look like they're metal frames.
So, David, where did you get the idea from, or was there some other inspiration that helped you?
Well, there's a very long tradition of people paper making, and last autumn we visited Fabriano, famous for paper, the Italian paper making, Fabriano paper. And it was interesting walking around the museum where they show the original process of how it was done. And actually, it's exactly the same. It's what I'm doing, there's no difference. And so it was interesting to have a conversation with the paper makers there, who were doing the artisan papers and they were using things like artichokes, cacioffi. So that's not sort of unusual, but what I think is unusual is actually doing the casting on sheets of metal where you've actually laid out a design, piece of artwork. I haven't seen examples of that being done before. And I'm not quite sure, are they prints or are they unique works? In a way, each one is completely unique. And that's quite exciting. I quite like that kind of order, disorder that you get with the pieces.
So what does your typical day look like? You wake up, you have a cup of coffee. Talk me through your day.
Italy it's very seasonal. So we tend to be there in the autumn for the olive harvest. And then there from sort of late mid-February through to the end of April, which is when we do the pruning. Autumn in Italy tends to be pretty good. The weather's good. So I'm outside most of the time. So most of the work that I do is outside. So I get into a kind of rhythm of got the coffee, bit of cheese, bit of fruit, and then get into a routine of it's either making sculpture or doing drawings or the paper making. So the paper making, when I do that, it tends to be pretty intense for couple of weeks. It's very weather dependent. I need at least 20 degrees C for it to make it to dry the paper. And sometimes I just put the paper onto the side of the house and that paper dries within about half an hour. And then I've been doing these very careful sort of geometric watercolor studies, which are very much inspired by the surrounding church mosaics and frescoes and things like that I go to. So it's that sort of rhythm. In the autumn, so when I go back in the spring, when I go back next week to Italy, when I'm pruning big pieces of wood, I'll be selecting pieces for sculptures. And then they will go through a sort of series of iterations, which I will then bring back, and they then get finished off in ditchling in my workshop here, where I've got access to sort of bandsaws and slightly more refined way of working with the pieces.
Sounds a really horrible life you've got. I mean, balancing Italy and down the south in England. I mean, gosh, how awful for you.
It couldn't get more of a contrast between Ditchling in Sussex and Palombara Sabina in Lazio, which is about 35 kilometres northeast of Rome. So different, so different. One of the nice things about working in the olive grove is that no one complains about the sound of the chainsaw. Whereas in our village, we are surrounded by about 20 houses. It would be hopeless.
So what have some of your challenges been for you to really get your work out there and possibly working with galleries like Hayden? Has it been an easy journey for you?
It was confidence. It was really interesting. It took me a long time to feel confident about my own practice, but about the kind of work that I wanted to make. And work that I felt really, actually, I could approach a gallery with this and have a sustained body of work. And I think that took me quite a few years. I had a lot of self-doubt there about it. It was good showing it as part of artist open houses because you inevitably get people giving you feedback about the work. And one of the things which I think has been very helpful to me is having some good critical friends who are practitioners, who are makers. And we do very often different kind of work. It's good having that dialogue with people. The thing which I really was useful to me, and something which I would sort of recommend to other artists, would be go and do an art residency. So a couple of years ago, I signed up and went to Tussa, which is on the north coast of Sicily near Palermo. And it was 3 weeks in an open studio. I was the only Brit there. The rest, they were all Americans, all professors of fine art printmaking practice. And some of them a little intense, but it was great fun. And it really helped me in thinking through my ideas, my practice, and what I wanted to show. So I think when I came back from that, I then felt in a position to submit work for open exhibitions. But it took me time. It's taken me, I think, probably about 5 years to really feel confident about it. And to do this, talk about it in a way, yeah.
Honestly, it's incredible, the work, when you see it. So the fact that you've had that journey to build your confidence up, it's like, well, it's been well worth the wait for it. They really are stunning pieces.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
I can't wait to have more of them in the gallery. Hint, hint.
Well, there's the work. It's all there in my head, ready to go when I get back. Yeah.
What do you hope people take away once they've seen your work? Or does it matter?
I think what's interesting is how people read the work. I'm obsessed by abstraction and geometry, but people often want to read into it something figurative, or it resonates with them in terms of their own experience. And that's fine. I mean, that's absolutely fine. That's their experience. And if my work kind of takes them on that journey, great. That's okay. I think people enjoy the backstory, the narrative, how the work has evolved. What I'm very conscious of, and I don't kind of want to labour it, but the impact of climate change is quite dramatic on the agriculture in Italy and on olive harvest and that kind of fragility. I think an element of that about the work, I would kind of like people to kind of latch onto a little bit and think about. A couple of years ago, there were some really quite significant earthquakes and earth tremors in the Abruzzo, which we felt in Palombara, even though it was sort of 100 kilometers away. And that idea of these buildings just suddenly collapsed. And that, again, made me start thinking, well, how do you make a piece of sculpture, which on the one hand looks solid, but on the other hand could at any moment collapse? And trying to introduce ways of cutting and drilling into the pieces to create that effect. And I think that also works a little bit with the olive leaf and the grape skin pieces, that sense of fragile and fragility. And we're living in...
And they are fragile. I mean, I've had them beautifully framed, haven't I? They look stunning. But you know, little pieces are always falling off them. They are that fragile. And that's just the beauty of the work. No, it's fine. It just doesn't bother me at all. Once you explain to the clients that, you've made the paper and what they're actually made of, it's just one of those things. But they're beautiful. They're stunning.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. For me, there was an element of, I was looking, when I was in the gallery, I was looking at them again. It was that sort of, you sort of stepping back a little bit and seeing them in a different context. Without sounding kind of grandiose, I was thinking at some of those Rothko paintings that he did, those colour field paintings, which are very kind of calming. And I think I saw them recently. They were in the Tate in St. Ives. I just thought, there's kind of an element of that there about the piece. There's a kind of calmness about them and serenity about them as well.
You spoke about confidence. What about motivation? Are you always motivated, or do you have moments where you struggle?
One of the things that worries me, I've always got lots of ideas about work I want to make, and it's kind of, do I work in a figurative way or in an abstract way, or what materials I need to be working with. I think what does worry me is repeating oneself and getting into a kind of, that work, we'll do some more of those. And it's kind of pushing yourself not to repeat yourself. But, you're developing a language, and people who engage with that like to see that. But it's also then testing yourself a bit. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I think, Tracey, did you say in one of the other conversations that we had that for you it's sometimes quite important to see a development as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, listening to what you just said then, there's no way that I'll let you keep repeating yourself. Because I want to push you. I want to obviously develop the sizes because that's obviously been very successful going from the smaller pieces to the larger pieces, but also develop the colours, the textures, definitely more the geometric patterns. I just want to get you delving into that, and maybe a little bit more layering in the work, overlapping papers onto each other and seeing one image come through from underneath onto the next. So there's lots of exploring that we can do to make the work even more exciting. I've got lots of ideas, so that's part of a gallery, is to work with you and throw some things out there, and then you experiment and then see if something different happens with it. So it's exciting.
One of the interesting things about those sort of paperworks is that you can add carborundum to them. I've been working with like marble dust, travertine dust, creating. So these are materials which are kind of echo that landscape, that Lazio. It's part of Lazio, but you can use them in a way that creates another dimension to the work. So it's interesting that you say about developing the geometric, because I think the Palazzo Butera piece is the most successful one. And I think it's kind of thinking, well, why was that successful? What is it about that? And looking at how to develop that idea into new works over the next couple of months.
David, Tracey, as you know, really values the relationship, I think, that she has with the artists. And I get a sense that collaborative toing and froing between, the curator and what you do. Do you embrace that as an artist?
No, I think it's good to be tested and to be challenged. At the end of the day, I'm at a point in my life where I might work with I want to make. That doesn't stop Tracey giving me some thoughts and ideas and suggestions. And it's that dialogue,
I always say what I think. So exactly. David, it's like, well, we'll go on this journey. We'll see what happens. Just trust me. Just trust me.
I mean, there are surprises, and it's good for me to be testing this myself like that.
Absolutely.
And it's also,
and if it doesn't work, if things don't work, then what's lost? Just a few hours of making paper, eh?
It's just a line on a piece of paper.
Exactly. More leaves out there next year to make more paper.
It's really interesting, because one of the things when I was teaching, and both my kids did Art Foundation, and I used to, when they were making work, I'd say to them, look, don't get too precious about it. It's just a mark on a piece of paper. You can all screw it up and start again. So what do I get now from them? Exactly that feedback.
I'll remind you of those words in a few years' time.
Just one question, David. What was it that, just going back to the Hayden Gallery, what was it that stood out in terms of why you wanted your work there?
I thought the gallery had been very well organised. I think the exhibition had been very well curated. It was a very clear, high standard. I could see the fit with Tracey, but it was in a way different to some of the other work that she's got showing there. But then again, that's kind of interesting to have that breadth of work. And it was lovely when I went to the private view to meet some of the other artists. And we had some really interesting conversations about their work, my work, how it fitted in the gallery. So that for me was a good pull, a good plus.
Also, David came in at the baby being born. So he saw the baby at just a matter of weeks old. So he's on this journey with me. He's going to get to know my grandson and see him develop. And also, I'll put him out to work. He can start when he wants to earn some pocket money. He can be up those trees, just picking those leaves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I can see a great future ahead.
David, what would you say to other artists, no matter where they are on the journey, about displaying your art or selecting a gallery or the process? You've obviously said about the residency, but what else might you say?
I think what's really important is developing a body of work or a visual language that really resonates for you with your own interests and obsessions, as opposed to trying to go with what's current at the moment or the style. Or it's got to be honest for you and what you're excited about visually as an artist, as a maker. And then it's about pushing yourself and testing yourself I was joking about the idea of being not getting too precious about it. Taking risks with the work, I think, is so important. And then you will build that confidence to then present the work and show it to galleries. And also finding people who are good critical friends to talk about your practice, not just saying, it's lovely.
That is not helpful.
It's not helpful. It's not doing you any favours. I mean, what's interesting is one thing about doing artist open houses, some people come in and they'll spend half an hour and they'll really engage with the work and they'll talk to you about it. And they'll see things in it or ask questions, which makes you think about the practice, about the work that you're doing. And then others will walk in and walk out again. That's okay too. So I suppose that's the one, I think, advantage of doing the artist open house or showing your work where you get to get the feedback. Whereas with the gallery, it's kind of you're a bit more removed from it. But that's also interesting. That's also okay because you will get feedback through from the people working at the gallery too about the practice. But I think it's making work every day, getting into that routine of making and not waiting for the muse. It ain't going to come. You just it's a job. At times it can be very boring. I always play some Patti Smith when I'm in my studio. First, this is in England. First thing, like 15, 20 minutes, loud, G me up. And then it'll be Michael Nyman and Minimalist music for the rest of the day. But it's just that, get started, make the work, It's exciting.
Fantastic. What about, just a more kind of light-hearted question or two that we've asked a few of the artists that have been on the podcast. If you could collaborate with an artist or sculptor, living or dead, who might that be?
Can I just flip this slightly and say, can I collaborate with an architect?
Of course.
And I say that because, as I mentioned, my wife's an architect. And though we've collaborated on various sort of house renovations and building projects, we've never actually really collaborated on an art project. And one of the things that we're thinking about is building a kiln for a wood fire, like a olive wood fired kiln out at Palambara. We have a lot of olive wood to burn. And she's interested in making objects. We have very similar interests. So we thought that actually might be a fun thing to do over the next 12 months. So we'll kind of watch this space really on that one.
That sounds interesting. If your art could talk, what would it say about you, do you think?
The olive wood sculptures, I think, would say, could do better. However, they would say that they're very grateful for having been selected and made into beautiful objects to be placed in people's houses, as opposed to being put in the wood pile to be burnt. So I think that would be the olive wood sculptures. The grape skin paper, I think that the comment would be, you're better at making artworks with us than you are at making wine.
Oh, that's fantastic. So just a last question from me. What would the David of today say about the young David back at 18?
I think it's, you can do it. Be confident about what you're doing in your practice. You made some very good work in those early years. And on reflection, maybe you should have stuck at it.
I wonder what you would have done had the olive grove not come along. I wonder what your work would have been.
That's really interesting. Now, I did you might not have seen these, but I did a whole series of I call sculptural interventions. And they were done around the time of COVID, when we were going down to Shoreham for long walks. And Shoreham is a very interesting industrial kind of area of ports and shipping, and it's quite edgy. And I think a lot of my work would come out of that, actually, as opposed to the South Downs. It's well covered. There are lots of artists doing paintings about the South Downs, whereas Shoreham, I think, that would be like where I'd go to. I love that interface between the sea and the land. I think that's quite exciting.
I've actually got quite a few artists that I represent from that area. So yeah, it's quite interesting, and their work is quite powerful. So yeah.
David, thank you very much for joining us. Really enjoyed hearing a little bit about your journey and what you've been on. So, from myself, thank you so much.
And I just want to say I'm looking forward to my trip to Italy. I've got to come out and see where you actually do the work. So Browne and I will put a trip together at some point and come and visit you, I think.
This has been really good fun, and thank you for inviting me. And yep, you're very welcome. We're only half an hour from Rome.
Fantastic. Thank you, David, for sharing a little bit more about your story and your artistic journey, I suppose. Tracey, what stood out for you?
Oh my gosh. Once again, you talk about the work, you describe the work, but it's such a visual thing. The quality and the interest in David's work, it blows me away. I'm so looking forward to his development, and I think he will develop. I think he's at the very beginning stages. He'll develop over the years. I think he's literally just touching the surface at the moment. Yeah, I think this is going to be a very exciting journey for him, for me, for the gallery. Very, very excited about this guy.
Yeah, I think for me, it was that fact that he sort of invented that kind of new process, really, using those olive leaves to make the paper, casting it onto metal and embracing that kind of unpredictability of rust and time and how that was going to affect it.
That's the exciting thing about it, because it's not a paintbrush. It's not ready-made colours that you're dealing with. It's like, oh my God, when I peel away that paper, what am I going to reveal? That's the excitement of it. And you can see that in the work. You can see the layers, and you can see that, there's some hidden stuff going on there, because, obviously some of this has been left on the plate. So great work, really great work.
And the other thing that sort of struck me was that fear, we spoke, didn't we? The fear of sort of repeating yourself versus the importance of sort of staying true to your own voice. It's kind of a delicate kind of balance, really. And you want to push yourselves forward and grow. But in doing that, we can sometimes maybe lose sight of the work that's unique to us. What do you think about that? Because I know you're always keen to develop, aren't you?
I'm always keen to develop. I don't think any audience that comes back regularly to see an artist that we represent, or any gallery represents, you want to see that, over the years, things have moved on a little bit. An artist could stay safe in their own little bubble and their own little technique, their own way of working. But for me, it's the journey that an artist is prepared to take, prepared to develop, prepared to stretch themselves. It is exciting for them, but it's also exciting for the audience, definitely.
So I guess wherever you are, wherever you're listening, and whoever you are, wherever you are on your creative journey, whether you're just starting out, reinventing yourself, maybe do what David does. Experiment, take risks, be open to change, but never at the cost of what really makes your work yours. That's my final comment, Tracey. What do you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. Life is too short to not take chances. So anybody out there, take those chances. If you have to juggle it with other, a paid job for a while to establish yourself, do that. But if you've got this urge to get back into your art, into your creativity, go for it. What can you lose?
Fantastic. Thank you, Tracey, as ever. Looking forward to the next one. So that's it on Hayden Behind the Canvas, this time where Tracey and I will do our best to bring the artists from behind the canvas to centre stage, where creativity and conversations come alive. Thank you, Tracey. Catch you next time.
Absolutely. Take care, guys, and look forward to the next artist. Bye-bye.